Hello everyone, I'm Ruth McKee, Project Director with the Hospitality and Tourism Skills Network, HATS, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar on Wellbeing, Practicalities, as part of our Recruitment and Retention webinar series. It's brought to you by HATS and supported by Tourism NI. Just by way of intro, HATS is an employer-led collaboration that's supported by Invest NI. We bring together employers from across the industry with key delivery partners, with a collective focus on addressing talent attraction and retention issues in the sector. As part of our activity, this series is being delivered to help businesses to recruit and retain a sustainable workforce and to support the implementation of our hospitality and tourism commitment, which is a voluntary code of conduct which has been launched recently by HATS to improve the attractiveness of our industry as a provider of good quality employment and highlighted as a great place to work. The commitment covers critical areas such as providing good quality training, work-life balance, and wider employee support, which our webinar series dives into in much more detail. So for this session, we're putting the spotlight on the topic of well-being practicalities, work-life balance. And I'm delighted to welcome and introduce JP Taggart of Core Impact, who will be discussing getting the fundamentals right to help support the well-being of your employees and to create an environment not only your team members but others will want to work. JP has over 10 years experience in leading in developing teams within hospitality and the leisure sector, where he's acquired a wealth of experience in strategic management and leadership with a strong focus on organizational culture. JP has a real passion and enthusiasm for working with and developing people and supporting businesses to develop and deliver sustainable, effective, positive team cultures. So I'm delighted to hand over to you, JP, for this, the next in our series.
Thank you so much, Roshan. Really delighted to be here to facilitate this workshop, and hopefully with the topic of well-being practicalities, I can hopefully provide some examples, some top tips, and some industry relevant discussion points that we can hopefully, and you can hopefully follow in this session and take with you and put into practice straight away. So we're taking the tagline of it's a lot more, it's about a lot more than fruit bowls in the canteen. So we're taking a step further. And today what I wanted to do was focus in on the culture first and foremost, because Roisin mentioned that that's a lot of the work that we do. And so what we're saying here is, if you want to create more work-life balance for your team or encourage your team to have better work-life balance, a starting point would be to create a culture around the knowledge, around the practice, around the education of work-life balance, especially because we work in an industry where it doesn't necessarily give everybody the opportunity to maintain a structured, kind of healthy lifestyle in some cases. If you're working in a bar and you're working until 2 a.m., you're probably going to sleep in a bit longer and you're not jumping up to do your sunrise yoga, or you are, but you're going to burn out at some point or another. So we'll look a little bit about the culture of that, and we'll look at understanding the industry rules and how mental health actually impacts performance in our industry. Having the unsociable hours, having the I suppose the lifestyle that you'll have in terms of your friends and family may work 9 to 5 rules, and you may be working more out of hours, unsociable hours. And it's really important to remember that you have to figure out ways that you can make it work, because the industry isn't going to change. The times that people want to socialize are not going to change. And learning how to, I suppose, identify maybe some trigger points, identify yourself, how you can spot some of the stressors for you. And we'll look at that. And we'll look at what is work-life balance. We'll look at what it actually means, what it means for you and for people who live in work in the industry. And we'll look at some well-being practices. So not a very long session. We just wanted to make sure that it's a wee bit hard-hitting for you and some food for thought again for you, your teams, and for the industry as a whole. Now, we couldn't start without highlighting that the hospitality and tourism industry plays a big role in Northern Ireland. And prior to COVID, it actually sustained more than 60,000 jobs across Northern Ireland. I know that we're having issues at the moment with attracting people to the industry. And this is what we're hoping to do with this partnership with HATS and Tourism Northern Ireland. We're hoping to make sure that we can provide opportunities for you as employers and leaders within the industry to provide opportunities for your team. And work-life balance is probably not something that you've looked at before. So hopefully you can take some of that, some positive tips away, and you can put it into practice. It's remembering that 1 in 20 jobs in Northern Ireland were in the industry, and it contributed about £1.1 billion to the local economy, or the UK economy. So it's huge. It's a big thing. And we need to remember that if we don't take it seriously and focus on the fact that, as I've mentioned previously, that there's a skills gap in our industry, we're fully aware of that. Focusing on things like work-life balance and how that plays a part in your culture, in your organization, and what you do for your team will help. So, hospitality and tourism roles. Okay, when we're working in the hospitality industry and the tourism industry, we're doing a lot of different things at once. The term jack of all trades comes to mind. You may be helping somebody with a first aid issue. You may then be serving somebody food. Hopefully you washed your hands in between. I've listed off some points here of roles, and there are many, many more that fit within our industry. When you're doing so many different things at once, the doing two things at once sort of trend comes into play very quickly. In order to scale historically in a structure of an organization within the industry of hospitality and tourism, you're usually the people who are usually the people who are really good at multitasking, that have high emotional intelligence, that they are able to deal with stress. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody has those skills, and it also doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's happy with that. Not everybody is happy to be a host for half their shift and a waiter at the other half, or they're a bartender at one point and then they're a server at another point. But that is our industry, and it's about trying to figure out how do you strike a balance as a leader of what the expectations are of your team. And whenever this isn't managed correctly, it's important to remember people will leave, they will look elsewhere. And certainly throughout the pandemic, we found that there was a lot of people who decided that they wanted to move away from the industry. Now, mainly because there were no jobs and we were put into lockdown and there were restrictions and it was tough going. Now, as we emerge and we build and we try to gain some of that momentum that took so long to create, we need to start thinking ahead. We need to start thinking, can we change how we run our shifts? Can we change how we recruit and what roles we're recruiting for? Or can we at least try and be more clear about what their role is going to be? And also, what are the expectations for them to be successful? So if you want to try and figure out how to get everyone on the same page, be very clear about what their roles are, what the expectation will be, and also what does success look like? If at the first part of the shift, they're a better bartender than they are a server, does that mean that it should be balanced out and that they're not a great all-rounder? Probably not. You should be able to, on a case-by-case basis and shift-by-shift basis, identify what they're going to be doing, what is expected of them. And of course, like always in hospitality and tourism, something will go wrong, something will happen, things will change, a group of customers will come in and people are expected to step up. But at least try and create that culture that you understand that it isn't okay to miss out on a break because things got really busy. And of course, we're not mind readers. We're not fortune tellers. We can't tell what's going to happen in the future, but we can try to mitigate the risks of these things happening. And that sometimes usually means making sure we have enough people on hand. And we can talk about that as we go on. So with that in mind, why do people leave? What are some of the common reasons why employees decide to leave? Mainly, it'll be because they don't feel valued. There's no sense of purpose. The working hours, which will always be a sticking point for some people, you either are willing to work on sociable hours and work within this industry, or you won't. And that's what you usually find when you're recruiting. People do it for a period of time, maybe when they're a student, or maybe people are just resigned to the fact that they enjoy it and they prefer, or, which I would have found a lot, is that it's their second job and they're happy to do evenings, they're happy to do weekends because it's extra money. It's paying for the holiday that's coming up next year, or it's paying for their education, or it's paying for the car that they want. The working environment is something that we can work on to an extent. Okay, so we can try and create the best environment for people to work within. That doesn't necessarily mean the tangible things. It can actually be the working culture, the people, the relationships with management, which again, I'll mention this term, you don't necessarily leave a business or an employer, but you do leave a manager, because if you don't get along with your management, then life becomes very, very difficult. And so it's about that upskilling of management and understanding the importance of their role and what they have to offer to the team. And of course, lack of development opportunities. And that's so important. And when we look at a little bit around culture, it's important to remember that if you want your people to stay with you, they need to know what that path looks like. So when we talk about work-life balance, I believe it's about helping your team strike the balance. And when I say work-life balance, what do I mean? Well, work-life balance involves the minimization of work-related stress and the establishing of a stable and sustainable way to work while maintaining health and general well-being. Now, unfortunately, the problem in our industry is that it's really hard to do that. It's really hard to have a consistency to anything that we do. Our shift patterns change, the amount of people we need on shift change, depending on the location of where we work, different times of the year, or if there's events nearby, if you're a restaurant or pub, or you're a tour operator, if you have summer could be really busy, or the weather could stop it from being busy. And, that in itself, and the management of your operations and your team and your rota, it's really difficult. So whenever you can't necessarily get that right all the time, because there's always that wave of sometimes you do it perfectly, sometimes you just don't. You're trying to strike that balance. So then to ask you also to go further to provide an opportunity for your team and yourself to have a better balance on work and life. It's not an easy one. It's not easy. But the problem and the reality is that employee expectations have changed. They've changed. And after a study done by Korn Ferry, it was actually found that in the industry, a good work-life balance was rated most desirable as a characteristic of an employer. So the research proves that anyone who wants to work in this industry will require that you put in effort, or at least an importance on work-life balance for your team. And how does that look? How do you make that work? Well, I believe it starts with developing a winning culture. Okay, so it's about creating the understanding that you might not get it right all the time. Okay, nobody is going to get this right at all times. It's called a balance for a reason. Always balancing, never balanced. Okay, but if you're open, honest, and transparent with your team, and you say to them that you have a real inclination to try and make sure you can do the best you can do, because you can only work with what you have. And what I mean by that is we're in an industry where we do work late hours. We do work sometimes more than the prescribed amount of time that you're meant to, albeit if you're happy to. And that is something we have to work with, and people have to resign themselves to that fact. So if they want to work in the industry, first and foremost, they need to know that that is something that's going to be pack and parcel. But what you can do is focus on this process of creating a culture that buys people in, that helps them feel that, while you can't necessarily change how the industry is run or when business will be busier, that you will put an importance on about caring about them and their work-life balance. So it's communicating how you care, communicating that you understand that they have a life outside work, that they want to do things, they want to actually be able to go away on the busy periods. Summer is a busy time, Easter is a busy time, Christmas especially is the busiest time of year on the run up to Christmas for our industries. And you find that it's about making sure people know that it is okay for them to take time off. And it's changing the culture of, I can't believe you're trying to take time off. whenever we're going to get so busy. Well, as an organization, if you want to hold on to people long term, you can't expect everybody to want to work on every single major holiday throughout the year. And it's not fair on your team to have that high an expectation. And we need to look at ourselves, just because maybe we as leaders are so committed and so willing to work the times that everybody else is off with their families, because that's our industry. It is our industry, but you can't have that same expectation each and every time of your team. You can't necessarily expect everybody to work to that level of you. What you need to do is you need to care, like it says in this first point, you need to make sure off the back of that you align your leadership with behaviors and attitudes that will link to creating this culture that people feel that they're actually allowed to take time off, that there isn't a guilt or a shame of asking for holidays around Christmas or asking for holidays around Easter, and that you can do that. Of course, you have to put parameters in place. Of course, you can't let everybody. You need to find out what works for you. Personally, in my experience, what we used to do was, based on our team of about 30 to 40 people, there was about 2 or 3 people allowed off around that time. And it was first come, first serve, simple. And we tried our best. It wasn't always perfect. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it just didn't. But again, it is that roller coaster. It's figuring out that you won't get it right, but explain to your team that you care and you do want to give them the best they can have, and the best time off and whatever, but it isn't always going to be exactly the way they want. For me as a leader, it's about trading it off a little bit. It's about making sure that people know that if you miss out on that day, you're going to get the next day, and make sure you present it in that way, not in a manipulative way, just simply, I'm really sorry you can't have that off because there's so many people off right now, but you can't have this day off. Will that mean anything to you? Or when is the next time? And let's see if we can get that worked out. And it's just your leadership skills in that sense. Develop that team of culture champions that I've mentioned before. Make sure that you buy your people in and that they are interested in creating a work-life balance, maybe even a work-life balance program or something that gets everyone bought in, that beyond what they do today and daily, that there is a real care and time and effort put into this that isn't directly related to making sure the customers are happy, that it's actually based around the fact that you care about them and that you want them to have that balance. Find those champions. They'll be your informal leaders, but they'll also be your formal leaders who can work in conjunction and make sure that it's something that everybody is involved with. Because one thing that feels like it's stress relieving or more quality time for themselves isn't necessarily the same as everybody else. You want to get consensus on that and start that two-way communication. Make sure that you create interventions, that you provide opportunities for people at all opportunities. Every time that there's an opportunity, that you give them that opportunity. And what I mean by that is, maybe you're in a team meeting and you want them to take the time, but some people may not want to communicate in the team meeting. So give an opportunity for a survey to be put out, or give an opportunity for people to contact you directly on WhatsApp through beyond the WhatsApp group chat if you have one, and make sure that you action any feedback that is given. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to take everything that your team say on board. It actually just means that you take it on board and you figure out, can it work? Will it work? Usually money or time are the thing that's going to get in the way. Can be innovative, or even, throw it back to them and say, we'd like to do this, but can you make it work in your time? Can you make it work in before that event happens? Whatever that looks like. But in this case, with work-life balance, making sure that it fits. Anything short of necessarily making sure people just don't work there, just making sure that they're happy to work around what you have to work with, if you know what I mean, in terms of their shift patterns. Work with the team to create an environment that they feel heard and valued, and that will happen if you do what I just said, that you listen to them, that you take it on board. But if you don't use it or you don't think it will work, that you explain to them why it won't work. And this will help you become an employer of choice. It will get you to where you want to be. And that's what we're trying to do. Now, you'll hear this term employer of choice a lot. Like I said earlier, you'll employer brand, being the person or the business that you want people to come to, that you want them to work with you. And it's about making sure that you create this culture that's winning. It's a winning culture that people want to be part of. I guarantee you, and I've seen it happen, one of the big KPIs that I love talking about in terms of my past experience about putting this method in place was we had 0 employee turnover for over 2 years. Now, this was around 2016, 2017, I'd say, maybe even 2017, 2018. But I can tell you that that is a fact. We didn't lose anybody. We only gained people. And in our industry, you don't hear that. You don't hear of that at all. And I can guarantee you it was based on this and a few other things. If you ever want to know, reach out to me and I can tell you. But the basis was this, making sure you listen to people, make sure that you have a clear view of where you want to go, make sure you have that work-life balance. So, so important. And I guarantee you will become that employer of choice. It's possible. And so the benefits to employees, if you focus in on well-being, and work-life balance, is they'll have improved health and well-being, so less stress. And you don't need me to get into it, but I can tell you that people have felt stress way more in the last 2 years than they ever have within this industry. And the statistics prove it. And it's important for us to then look at this and say, right, we need to actively do something that is going to make people feel that we're going to do things different moving forward. But God forbid if there was ever another pandemic or anything that will have an issue with operation or impact our operations, that we have at least learned from the previous experience of the pandemic, and we're now building on how our industry can move forward and help our people strike the balance of well-being and making sure that there's a better work-life balance. You'll find that the benefits also include for employees increased motivation and productivity. And you don't need to tell me, I don't need to tell you, sorry, and I'll tell you in the next slide, but I don't need to tell you how impactful that will be for your business. If your team are increased in their motivation and productivity, that only means better experiences for your employees or your customers, but your employees' experiences will increase as well because they're your internal customers. They will find that there's more you time or them time built into their daily lives if you help them strike that balance. And what that will mean is they'll be much more refreshed when they come into work. They'll find that they're actually happier, and there will be better working relationships. And of course, one of the big stressors in most, if not all organizations, one of the big key things that we find in our work at Core Impact is that there's internal office politics or conflict. And that's the thing that adds to stress most within the workplace. So better working relationships only means better efficiency, better culture, better morale. You'll actually find that they'll have better increase in critical thinking. So whenever they're approaching a task, or in our industry, that can be anything. A lot of it's social, but not only that, it could be stock related, it could be making sure that reports are done correctly, and they might be able to spot things that they maybe wouldn't have spotted if they didn't have such a good work-life balance. So figuring out how you can take that pressure off so that your people can actually think and feel that they're more, I suppose, dialed up and motivated to work better and more effectively. Greater focus on work and customers. So if your people are walking into work and they feel refreshed, they know that they have your back end, that you want them to feel refreshed and that they take the time that they need and that you back that up and that they find that they've struck a balance between work and life. You're going to find that they just have a greater focus when they're here, when they're present. They're much more present in the moment. And the customers, again, will feel that benefit. They'll feel that they are just switched on. They're not being sort of pulled from pillar to post, and that they are completely and utterly there to create an experience for them as the customer. So your employees will then feel the intrinsic motivation of that, and you'll just find that their ambition to grow in the role will increase. And you'll find that there are more people chomping at the bit to get into any leadership program you have or any training you want to provide, and they will add value to your organization. And that's where the pipeline of leaders emerges from. Again, like I said, you don't need to tell me, I don't need to tell you, if I can get that right, that there are benefits to you as an employer for your team to have a better work-life balance. Improved levels of absenteeism and sickness and stress. The main majority of across all industries for people leaving or being off work, mainly being off work throughout the pandemic, was actually related to stress. Okay, and that's because there is no work-life balance. I believe that there was a statistic across all industries, and it was throughout the pandemic, on average per month, people were doing around 27 hours per month, on average, overtime. There's many different reasons as to why people do that, and that sounds great. But it's not really, because it's clearly an impact. It clearly has an impact on work-life balance. And some of the reasons when I delved into this as to why people were doing extra time like that on average was because of fear of losing their job, guilt for feeling as though maybe they weren't able to spend as much time being focused at work than they would have, and just necessity. And so whenever people's lower order needs, their motivational needs at that physiological level aren't met, that people feel that they're not confident that their bills are going to be paid, they get stressed and they end up having to take some time off work. So it's important as an employer to take that time to help them have a work-life balance and to provide that confidence that they can actually, you can reap the benefits of that as an employer. Engaged employees, look, we know when people are when the team are engaged, you're just going to have far better results. The morale on shift's going to be better. You're going to feel as though things just work. You hear that in sporting terms, that the team are gelling. When you feel your team gel in a hospitality and tourism setting, there's nothing like it, especially as a leader, whenever you've helped try implement that. And as a result, what you find is there's actually greater innovation. So you'll find that the team are actually really involved in trying to get the best results, the best ways of doing things. And within our industry, it's actually really, really good to have a bit of competition with, especially people, businesses that are close to your business, like in terms of location or just relationship, and to build a bit of crack around trying to figure out ways to be more innovative. In the food and drink industry, which is very, very closely related to our industry, you find that when they use social media as a way and means of showcasing what they do, similar to what we do, especially on platforms like TikTok, you usually find that there's some innovative products that are created, services that are created, and as it says below, there's competitive advantage in that alone. But you'll find that there's improved employee turnover. In other words, it reduces. So you find that people aren't leaving you as much, because why would they go elsewhere if they're being treated well? And it's simple. It's very, very simple. If your leaders are aligned and their attitudes and behaviors are aligned with creating that culture, that people are okay to take time off, okay to take time to, get outside and breathe the air in, and on their break, or actually take their break, you'll find that people will be happy to stay with you. Because when you do it in comparison, unfortunately, across the board, that isn't intentional. It's just that in many cases, they're just so busy and they need to take the business when they can. Across the board, you don't find that that's actually promoted very well. And so people do end up leaving. And of course, like I said earlier, you'll have improved customer experiences. And that's really what the crux of this is all coming down to as well. If customers are happy and they have a good and consistent service and experience, they will keep coming back. That in turn, like I said about the innovation, will help create a competitive market advantage for you. And that's exactly what we're all in business for. We want people to keep coming back to us. But as a result, you will have more profits. Now, some of the practical industry considerations that I wanted to highlight are actually ROTAs. Okay, now I've mentioned these a few times throughout some of my points already, but it's set a day for publishing and be consistent. Now, if you work in the industry and you're watching this, you know that this is actually quite difficult to maintain. And I know personally, I've been in that boat where you feel that you want to get it out to everybody before even you say you will, but something gets in the way, you become over inundated with a problem and you need to focus on it. And maybe you forget, or maybe you're just exhausted and you're trying to create or salvage some level of work-life balance. So try and stick to it and have somebody who holds you accountable. So if you're the sole person who looks after the rota, speak to a manager or a supervisor or a team leader in the similar position to you who rotates on your shift and say, please make sure I do this. Or set a timer on your phone, or set specific non-negotiable time out in your diary, or at the end of the night or the start of the night before business starts getting busier, or early in the morning maybe. Just make sure you get it out on that day and let everyone see that you can be consistent. Shift swaps, okay? Actively consider requests and replies, to the requests, okay? Because it's so important. There's a few considerations here, okay? If you have your leadership aligned in terms of the behaviors and attitudes that they display, it's not about giving your best mate an opportunity to get the holiday that they want, or the shift swapped so that they can have some time to go out on a date or go out and spend time to go to see a movie. Yes, these things are important, but have a consistent approach for everybody, and make it very clear to your team what that looks like. Because whenever you allow one person to have a shift swap and somebody else finds out, usually it's because everybody wants to go and see the same comedy gig or the same concert. We've all been there, and we know what it's like, and we want them all to see it. But the reality is they all work on the same night or the same day, and you need to identify that only one or two or three can go. But shift swaps should have a consistent process in place. Everyone in the management team needs to know it. Ideally, everyone can have an opportunity to shift swap or confirm a shift swap or sign off on a shift swap. But ultimately, the general manager or a designated assistant manager should be the person who would be allowing the final sign off before the employee is allowed to see it. There needs to be a better process, not a squiggly line with no thought, and then all of a sudden somebody comes in the next day and says, but I asked the assistant manager last night, could I have it? And they said no. Communication's key in this, guys. Please make sure that we can try and refine this a little bit better. Doesn't seem like a big thing, but in the mind of your employee, it will be. That concert can mean everything to them. You don't know what they're going through. You should do, but in many cases you may not. Or that time off for a birthday party is really important. And yes, okay, they weren't well organized, but try and do something for them. Try and make sure it works. And being the person who ran the rotas in our site for about 10 years, I can tell you, it can always be moved. It can always be moved. There's always an option. So look for the options. Don't make life easier for yourself by saying no. Really consider everything and reply and tell people that this is the way it is, and make the reasonable adjustments to the rota so everyone knows who's in. Not a squiggly line through someone's name and then squiggling it in. Nobody knows who's actually on. Try and print it out again. Sufficient notice given for shift changes and requests, similar to what I just said. Make sure that you give an opportunity for people to do it. If it's an emergency and it's really last minute, but they help get somebody in for you, great. But otherwise, have a deadline, a week before the shift, and or before the new rota comes out. Try and be consistent about that as well. A range of shift patterns that are available to support working families, students, and part-time working. Okay, now this is one that I've had many debates about in teams that I've ran. Okay, even until recently with an organization that was help and support. Okay, people get their feathers ruffled really easily because they will, as employees, always feel that their personal preference is the most important, and rightly so. That's how they should see it. As a manager or a leader within the organization, it's actually your job to try and create a consensus and an understanding throughout the team that it is a case-by-case basis. Of course, if somebody is a single parent or somebody only gets to see their kids certain times, or regardless of any of that, they can only work so many nights in the week, you need to take that into consideration, okay? You also need to take a look at students and not have a bias or have an inclination that students don't have as many rights as other people. Of course they do. They're studying, in many cases, full time, and you need to try and find and strike the balance between, of course, family life and having kids is really important, and you have to make sure that you're looking after those people. Try and have a little bit of a consensus and a consistency towards your approach to making sure that you're, number one, making sure people are working on some of the busier nights, because what you find is in our industry, you'll get the people who are usually the newer people who are put on your sort of Friday night, Saturday night, or weekend shifts. And then the people who have been there longer are usually there midweek and they get the nice cushier shifts. And the perspective in our industry is, well, they've been here long enough and that they deserve that. Personally, I would challenge that a little bit. I would say that if they're your best people, why are they being put on the quieter nights? And it's about rotation. Now, this means more work for you in terms of the rota again, but what you need to do is you need to acknowledge that if you can rotate it and keep everybody happy, and I used to do this all the time, it made much more time and effort for me to make sure the rota was done in a way that was consistent and that everyone felt that it was good. The problem was, the reflex of that would have been that it would have had a negative impact on the culture. And I found that after doing that, everyone was happy, and not many people could have much to say about, you know, one week you might be on the weekend, the next week you won't. And it's just a case by case basis. And yes, again, you're going to say to me, well, that's not possible. It is possible because I've been there and done that. And I would highly recommend just trialing it and maybe swap the rota between people and see what works so that you can stay refreshed. Days off allocated were requested and split or together as per the employee requirements. You know, making sure that people actually get their actual days off if possible. But again, it's a first come, first served basis, and it's about making sure that you're not just giving somebody a blocked out period of time and then saying to somebody else, sorry, you can't have that. It's about case by case basis. It's none of this is ever going to be, it's always fluid. It's never going to be solid, especially in our industry working 7 days a week. Making sure holidays are approved or rejected in a timely manner. Make sure your team know from the get-go what way that works, but be consistent with it. It's one that falls through the cracks, guys. Shift patterns such as late or early and or back to back included in the schedule or the rotas or rosters as agreed by employees. So making sure that you try to take into consideration if people are working late, that they're not necessarily coming back in, or if you're splitting shifts, that they're happy with that. And some people, especially students, will tell you, like, I'm happy enough to do all day Saturday. It's the quickest way to get the burnout, to be honest. And that rotation idea that I told you about, especially Fridays and Saturdays, actually, but rotation idea is a really good one. But it's just what works for your team at the time. Sometimes it will work, sometimes it won't. So how can we support our people more? Well, we need to educate ourselves. When people don't have good work-life balance, it's important to remember that it will start to impact their mental health. So mental health first aid is a fantastic way of, it's a training program that any of the team can go through, and I highly recommend it to everyone that works in the organization, not just the leaders, but definitely the leaders at a start, and letting them know what the triggers can be for people who aren't looking after themselves effectively. But also mindfulness. And mindfulness is the practice, and I'll talk a wee bit about it later, but mindfulness is actually the practice of being present. And it's lots of different things. It's taking a drink and being mindful of the fact that you're taking a sip. Deliberately swallowing and taking time to appreciate if it's warm or cold. Being mindful of the fact and present enough to know that it's filling you full of liquid, it's nourishing. Now, it's a wee bit holistic for some people, but I can tell you that in practicing it myself and with my team members over the years, just some people will pick it up more than others, and largely as a consensus, you'll find that people are happier as a result of it. Just trying to create mindful little moments throughout the day, especially in the environments that we work within, when you're just flat to the mat, the sweat's tripping you, and you're changing your shirt before the end of the shift. Mindfulness is really a good practice that people can help to bring them into the moment and out of their head and just into their body a little bit and just relax, especially on their breaks, when really you're only getting 15 minutes sometimes. Align with experts. So we are really, really lucky at Core Impact to work with the amazing charity PIPS. But we've also had communications with Aware and other therapy professionals, people who are breathwork coaches. I'm a current breathwork coach, and I love doing that with businesses. I done it with a client yesterday with a group from England, and I just loved it and everything about it in terms of mindfulness and understanding some little techniques that can help you deal with stress will improve the experience that your team have in your team or while in your business. Build relationships and know your people. Like, genuinely get to know your people. I get that when you're in the industry a long time and then you have 16, 17, 18-year-olds coming in, you might be in your 30s, 40s, 50s, and you might say, get a bit old for that. There's no excuse for not getting to know your team. And again, I make no assumptions. There are amazing examples of this, but actively getting to know each individual person to a level that you can then pull upon whenever times get tough for them, for the business, for you, that you can actually pull upon and say, you know, I know you well enough to ask, is everything okay? Encourage social events. Let them get out and about. Make sure they're in work the next day, but let them get out. Let them get out and about. Let them know that it's okay to go and socialize sometimes and get out there and become a better team as a result of that outside of the work setting. And you'll find in our industry, it happens quite a lot anyway. Highlight the benefits of working in the industry. So make sure your people know how amazing this industry is. You will find that when they're whitewashed and they're burnt out, and after a really busy period, they're probably not all getting along very well, but in the core, they really do care about each other. But let them know that there's so many benefits to working in this industry. Not only the fact that we, as people who work in this industry for longer periods of time, build up an emotional intelligence that you just don't find in other industries on a natural basis based on the work they do. We get to meet people from all around the world. Yes, we work shift patterns, but if you want a doctor's appointment, usually when you work 9 to 5, you're taking a half day or taking a day off just for that. You lose a day's holidays as a result of that. Whereas if you're working in the evening or even in the afternoon, you can get an appointment with the doctors and you can do those things, or you can get out and get your shopping on quieter periods when everybody else is working. There's so many benefits to it. You get so many opportunities. Of course, in Northern Ireland, we are one of the best places in the world, but you can go anywhere in the world, hospitality, because in every single town, every single city, every single country in the world will have hospitality and tourism. So highlight that and be proud of it and let your team understand how exciting it is and what doors and opportunities it will open for them. Make breaks, holidays, self-exploration, and time off a priority for your team. Gone should be the days of being a martyr for working too many hours, being whitewashed, feeling as though you're stuck to the hip, that you live in the business. That is not something that's healthy. It does not promote work-life balance. And it's so important for us as leaders to highlight to the team that they do have a life outside it. We're not working, we're not living to work, we're working to live. And yes, the business is important, but they have to go and, I've had team members go away to Australia and come back. If you have a culture that people know that is looking after them, they will come back. Or, if they do that self-exploration, they will come back, or they'll move on to bigger, better things, and you'll be proud of them as a result. But always lead by example within your team, within the community, and within the industry as a whole. And I talk about the industry as a whole because when you really get into the circuits, everybody knows everybody. You get to know each other very, very quickly. We're not a big place. And so that's important, and that's really unique, actually, based on our industry. And so we should be utilizing that. So well-being, okay? Encouraging mental fitness. We hear about mental health. I like the term mental fitness because if you imagine it as mental fitness, you'll know that working at it makes you better at it, okay? So what is well-being? Well-being can be understood as how people feel and how they function, both on a personal and a social level, and how they evaluate their lives as a whole. Now, why this is closely linked to mental health is simply because our mental health, our mental health impacts our well-being, okay? And it's kind of two in one of the same. If you positively act on doing things that will make you feel that your well-being is better, that you have a nice work-life balance, then you'll usually find your mental health is quite good as well, or your mental fitness. Just for argument's sake, just in case anyone who doesn't know, especially in the place where we live in the World Health Organization describes and defines mental health as a state of well-being in which an individual realizes their own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively, if I could speak, and is able to make a contribution to their communities. Now, mental health in Northern Ireland. 1 in 4 adults in Northern Ireland will experience at least one diagnosable mental health problem in any 1 year. Now, unfortunately, Northern Ireland has one of the highest incidents of mental illness in the developed world. And if you, especially within the industry that we work within, a lot of our employees would fall into this. And the types of work that we do in terms of unsociable hours, going home late at night when everybody's in bed asleep alone, people who they care about doing 9 to 5, these things can contribute to impacting their mental health. So it's important to remember that you really build a close-knit group of people who know what they can do, and PIPs and Aware and all these amazing mental health charities who can help them. and really give them the advice they may need. Now, I'm not painting the picture that this is always the case, but I know my personal experience is I've had to signpost my teams, some people in my team, to these amazing organizations, and that's why I've highlighted them. Prevalence of mental illnesses in Northern Ireland is 25% higher than in England, and mental health is the leading cause of absence from work, and accounts for 39.1% of long-term sickness and leave. So you heard me talk about stress. That's directly related to mental health. So remember, please remember that it's so important, especially where we live in our industry, within our industry, that we focus on this and we don't shy away from it. Gone are the days when it's a taboo subject. The only way that we can improve the well-being of our teams is by having open, honest and frank discussions about their mental health at the very, very least. Beyond that, we have a wraparound system, a program, an aligned leadership approach to how we can support our teams to have better well-being through the things that I've already mentioned and some that I'll mention moving forward. So what are some of those things? What are some of the ways in how we can help our team to manage their mental well-being, and of course ours? Connect. Make sure you're connecting with people. Make sure that you're active. Take notice of your own little triggers. Some people may be sleeping more. Some people might not talk as much in social settings. Some people may not be eating as well. Educate yourself and your team and keep learning. Keep learning to figure out what your trigger points are. Keep learning in life in general, because it actually has a positive impact when we learn something new and we feel that we're developing. And one way in which I believe is a fantastic way to improve your well-being and your mental health as a whole is to give your time, give your patience, give your knowledge, give your ear, listen to people, be present, and provide opportunities for people to know that you're there for them. Because when we do these things, we talk about oxytocin, we talk about that feel-good love hormone. When we hug people, when we care for them, even when we listen to music, we get this release. But by giving, that idea of a giving hand never once, you will find that will enrich your mental health, it will enrich the relationships around you, and that social interaction will help your well-being. So, finally, some practices you can encourage your team to try. Mindfulness, I've already mentioned. There are so many different things you can do in mindfulness. It's just simply being present. That can be hard in a really busy environment, but it doesn't necessarily need to be on shift. It can be on their break during the shift, but also in private life and personal life. Make sure you provide examples and get people in to do talks or signpost people within the team or your team to go and try things. Meditation is a fantastic way for you to be more mindful. It's a fantastic way to gain more perspective on life, to provide ways in order for us to build our resilience in dealing with pressure. And another way is actually yoga. And I'll talk about breathing techniques at the end there, but breathing techniques actually stem from yoga. And the reason why I mention yoga is because it's not actually it's not hard for people to start into it. You can start with really simple beginner classes, and you'll actually find ones for free on YouTube. Or you can go to a directive class, which is usually the best way. Cold water therapies. If anyone's watching TV at the moment, you'll find that the Wim Hof methods are being displayed in this new program. Anyone who's ever tried it or would like to try it, I highly recommend. There is science that backs up the feel-good factor. I believe it's like 200% increase in dopamine if you take the time to that feel-good factor, that if you take the time to submerge yourself in cold water and just simply breathe, it will impact you in a positive way. I've done it before. I remember doing it back in October with a friend who is actually a cold water therapist. And I can tell you that it was one of the best days I've had in a long time, simply because it feels like you've drank about 5 espressos. But you haven't. And it has all the positive reactions that your body should feel. And those breathing techniques, this is tapping into your autonomic nervous system, which is kind of your rest and digest, which is when we want to go to sleep. and we want to relax, and our heart rate's nice and slow. And fight or flight, which is whenever we feel that we're feeling anxious, our blood pressures went up, our heart's beating really fast. This could be any situation, dealing with a challenging customer, going for a new job, just if you've got anxiety. These things can be impacted by our breath simply by breathing in specific ways and learning new techniques. And I'll give you one right now. 4-4 breathing. It's called a water breathing or a balancing breathing technique, which is breathe in for 4 seconds, hold, and breathe out for 4 seconds, then hold. And keep doing that for up to 3 to 5 minutes. And you will notice if you're highly strung, you will come back down to earth a little bit. If your energy is low, you will come back up to where you need to be. So it's called a balanced breathing technique, and I highly recommend it. And one of the best things about that technique is you don't actually have to be telling people that you're doing it. You could be standing in line in Tesco's. You could be in the taxi on the way to work. You could be on shift in between customers, and it will help you to level off a little bit. It's very good for your well-being. There are many more. There are many, many more, but this is just some that you could maybe signpost your team to, and hopefully have an impact on their work-life balance and their well-being. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel here, guys. It's letting you know things that you know and reminding you that if you encourage your team to do this and actively do it yourself and lead by example, you will impact the work-life balance and the well-being of your organization. So we've covered culture and the impact of embedding that as a starting point to create a work-life balance in your team and the practices that come along with that. We looked a little bit about understanding our roles within the industry and how they can impact our mental health and performance within organizations. We looked at work-life balance, what it is, what it does, how it impacts us. And finally, we took a little bit of a nod towards what well-being practices can look like and how they could map in to what we do within our industry. Again, guys, thank you so much for taking the time to come on to this workshop. I've really enjoyed it. And hopefully you can take these top tips and these insights, use them right away, and have a positive impact on your business, your team, and the industry. Thank you so much.
Thank you, JP, for another really engaging presentation, packed full, again, of advice, practical tips and inspiration for employers in building work-life balance into the business and getting the fundamentals right to help support the well-being of employees, which you've highlighted. Obviously, it's critically important in a post-COVID society where employees' expectations have changed. And we're continuing to see that heightened awareness on well-being and the demand for work-life balance. And the benefits that you've set out certainly do speak for themselves. I'd also like to thank Tourism NI for supporting this webinar series, and to all of you, thank you for attending. I hope you've gained real value and insight from the webinar and gleaned ways to support your people more, and that you will join us for other webinars in the series, for which you'll find details on our webpage, hatsnetwork.co.uk. All that remains is me to thank you again for joining us, and continued success on focusing on your people, implementing our hospitality and tourism commitments golden rules, which includes a core focus on work-life balance to give you stand out as an employer of choice, and helping our industry collectively make hospitality and tourism a great place to work. Thank you.